The sun was merciless that day, the kind of heat that makes the horizon bend and waver like glass. A dog lay crumpled in the sand, ribs sharp as broken branches, tongue cracked and bleeding. Around him the desert stretched endless and indifferent. No shade, no water, only silence broken by the faint rasp of his breath. His paws twitched weakly as if chasing a memory of running, of belonging, of home, but the earth beneath him burned hotter with every second. Somewhere in the distance, a crow circled lazily, waiting. The dog's eyes flickered open, cloudy yet still searching, clinging to life with a stubbornness that seemed impossible. He was nameless here, abandoned to the sun's cruel weight, bones sinking deeper into the dust with every fading heartbeat. And yet, fate had already begun to shift. Far beyond the mirage-lined road, a car engine echoed faintly, its sound swallowed quickly by the wind. A stranger unaware was drawing near. The desert, cruel and silent witness to so many endings, was about to hold its breath. For this dog's story was not ready to end, not yet. The desert had a way of swallowing time. Hours bled into one another beneath the pitiless sun, and for the dog, there was no before and no after. Only this endless present, stitched together by pain. The sand beneath him burned like embers. Every breath he drew was shallow rasping, pulling the air into lungs that rattled as if each inhale might be the last. His fur, once perhaps the soft color of wheat or ash, had dulled to a coat matted with dust, burrs, and neglect. The world pressed in on him with a silence that felt crueler than noise. His tongue was cracked and dry, mouth parched to the point of agony. Once, long ago, he remembered the taste of cool water spilling from a metal bowl, the faint echo of laughter. A child's perhaps, drifting nearby. That memory flashed like a mirage in his mind, but it only sharpened the ache in his body. Now there was nothing but the searing bite of thirst and the grit of sand that clung to his teeth when he opened his mouth in a desperate pant. Above him, the sky was a pale, merciless blue, without a single thread of cloud to soften the light. The horizon shimmered like a sheet of molten glass. His paws twitched in the dust, a reflex born of dreams that no longer matched reality. He had once run, he was sure of it, his legs carrying him across fields or sidewalks, the earth solid and kind beneath him. But here, the earth mocked him with its scorching heat, branding the pads of his paws and reminding him of his helplessness. A crow circled above, its shadow slicing briefly across the sand before vanishing again. The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of wings, heavy and deliberate, beating against the sky. Instinct surged weakly in him, the knowledge that he was prey, that the end was close. He tried to lift his head, to growl, to remind the world he still had fight left in him. But his voice had shrunk to a hoarse whisper, a sound swallowed instantly by the dry wind. The desert seemed endless, stretching in every direction like an ocean of stone and fire. There were no trees to break the monotony, no hills to hide behind, no shelter to crawl beneath. Just sand, rock, and the sun pressing down like a cruel hand. His ribs rose and fell like the slow creak of an old gate, every movement visible beneath his thin skin. He was little more than bones and stubbornness now, kept alive by a thread so fragile it seemed any gust of wind could sever it. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, he saw flashes, the glimmer of a leash, the rough scrape of a car door slamming shut, the roar of an engine as the world sped away without him. He didn't understand why. Dogs did not understand abandonment in the way humans did. He only knew the sound of departure, the sting of being left, the endless waiting that turned into wandering, and then, finally, collapse. His heart still sought those voices, that home, but his body was betraying him. The sun shifted higher, shadows shrinking into nothing. The dog lay unmoving now, his breath shallow enough to be mistaken for stillness. His ears, once alert and upright, drooped lifelessly against his skull. The wind picked up a grainy whisper, pushing small eddies of sand across his body as though preparing to bury him before death had fully claimed him. And then, faint, almost drowned by the desert's emptiness, came a sound, a low hum, distant but growing, weaving itself into the silence. The dog's ears twitched, barely perceptible, but enough to suggest a spark remained. He opened his eyes, the whites cloudy and dull, and strained toward the noise. It rose and fell like a heartbeat, mechanical and steady, the sound of wheels on the road. Somewhere beyond the wavering horizon, a vehicle was approaching. At first, it seemed no different from the many illusions the desert conjured. Perhaps it was another mirage, a false gift to a dying mind. But the sound grew stronger, carried by the shifting wind. The dog's chest rose sharply. A desperate surge of air pulled in as though life itself had heard his plea and sent an answer. The car drew nearer, though the driver could not yet see him. A small, broken figure pressed into the sand, nearly swallowed by the landscape. But fate had already shifted. What had been certain, death under the crow's shadow, now trembled with uncertainty. The dog lay trembling, caught between surrender and hope, the desert holding its breath, as if even it wanted to see what would happen next. His body remained weak, but somewhere within, a flicker of defiance stirred, faint as a coal beneath ash. His story was not finished, not yet. The road cut across the desert like a scar, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that had endured decades of heat and silence. A single car moved along it, its tires humming in steady rhythm, the sound swallowed quickly by the endless horizon. Inside, a man sat hunched over the wheel, his eyes weary from hours of driving. He wasn't traveling for pleasure. This was the kind of road one took when they had no choice, when the destination mattered more than the journey. Dust clung to his windshield, and the air conditioner coughed out tepid air that barely kept the heat at bay. He rubbed at the stubble on his jaw, blinking against the glare of sunlight bouncing off the hood. Out here, there was little to see but sameness. Rock, sand, and sky blurring together into a monotony that numbed the senses. His thoughts had wandered miles away, tangled in private worries he carried with him like invisible luggage, bills overdue, a family phone call he hadn't returned, silence waiting for him at home. He drove with the weight of his own quiet burdens, unaware that the desert was about to hand him something he hadn't asked for, something that would change everything. At first, he barely noticed. Just a shape in the sand, off to the right of the road. His eyes passed over it like they would any rock or discarded tire. But something snagged at his mind, a subtle wrongness that urged him to glance again. He slowed the car instinctively, his gut telling him this wasn't debris. The shape was too soft, too fragile against the vast brutality of the desert. He pulled to the side, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and leaned forward, squinting. That's when he saw it, a dog, barely more than a shadow of one. Its body was still, sides barely moving. Ribs jutted out sharply, fur scorched and thinned by sun. The man's chest tightened at the sight, a visceral pang that made him curse under his breath. For a moment he sat there, gripping the wheel, torn. He was miles from the nearest town. He didn't know if the dog was already gone, or if stopping would do anything but delay his own journey. A voice inside told him to keep driving, that this was nature, that not every fight could be his to carry. Yet his hands refused to shift the car into gear. His eyes lingered on that fragile frame in the sand, and something in him cracked. He opened the door. Heat slammed into him immediately, dry and suffocating, stealing the breath from his lungs. He shielded his eyes with one hand as he stepped onto the asphalt, the soles of his boots clicking sharply against it before sinking into the softer shoulder of the road. The desert smelled of dust and hot metal. As he drew closer, the truth became unbearable. The dog was alive, but only just. Its eyes half open, glazed with exhaustion, tried to follow his movement. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. He crouched, hesitating, then reached out a trembling hand. The dog flinched weakly, a twitch more instinct than strength, but it was enough to shatter the man's hesitation. There was still will in this creature, still some ember refusing to die. He whispered softly, words that meant nothing but carried gentleness. "Hey, buddy, it's okay, I've got you." His voice cracked as if the desert itself demanded honesty. Leaving no room for bravado, he slid his arms beneath the frail body. The dog's weight shocked him, not heavy, but disturbingly light, as though he were lifting only bones wrapped in fragile skin. He felt the tremor of shallow breaths against his chest, the faint twitch of paws pressing weakly as if resisting, then surrendering. The man cradled him carefully, as if afraid he might break apart entirely. Walking back to the car felt endless, each step an argument between urgency and caution. The sun beat down harder now, merciless, reflecting off the metal roof and searing the man's arms. The dog's head lolled weakly against him, eyes flickering open just long enough to meet his own. In that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. A plea, a promise, a fragile tether binding two lost lives together. The man laid the dog gently across the passenger seat, fumbling for the water bottle he kept in the cup holder. Unscrewing the cap with shaking fingers, he tilted it carefully, letting drops trickle between the dog's cracked lips. The animal's tongue flicked once, twice, before lapping desperately at the liquid. Relief surged through the man's chest, sharp and overwhelming. He whispered again, this time steadier. That's it, drink. You're safe now. He climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, his heart pounding harder than the tires against the asphalt. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but the journey had changed. He no longer drove only for himself. A fragile life sat beside him, tethered by chance, by mercy, by something larger than either of them could understand. The man gripped the wheel tighter, jaw set with new resolve. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if the dog would make it through the night. But he knew this much. He couldn't let the desert claim him. Not now. Not when hope had finally, against all odds, found its way into the sand. Night fell heavy over the desert road, the sky a canvas of black stitched with faint, trembling stars. The man's headlights carved two narrow beams through the darkness as the car sped on, carrying its fragile passenger deeper into the unknown. The dog lay curled on the passenger seat, a shadow of life pressed against worn fabric. Every so often, a small tremor rippled through his frame, a reminder of the body's desperate battle to cling to existence. The man stole glances, his chest tightening at each shallow rise of ribs. "Hang on," he whispered, as if words alone might keep the dog tethered. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. Hours bled away, until finally the faint outline of a town appeared, pale lights flickering against the horizon, fragile as lanterns in the dark. When he pulled into his driveway, the night air felt softer, cooler than the desert's cruel breath. He gathered the dog again into his arms, carrying him inside like a child. The small house was simple, cluttered with the unremarkable signs of solitude. A stack of unopened mail on the counter, a jacket slung carelessly over a chair, silence echoing louder than sound. But tonight, silence was broken by the faint, wheezing breath of a life pulled back from the edge. He laid the dog on an old blanket near the kitchen, spreading it out gently. The animal barely stirred, too weak even to lift his head. The man moved quickly but carefully, filling a bowl with water, another with a handful of soft food he mashed with trembling hands. He dipped his fingers into the water, bringing them to the dog's lips. At first, there was nothing. Then, a faint lick, hesitant and wary. Relief surged in his chest like a tide breaking free. All night he stayed near, crouched on the cool tile floor with his back against the cabinets. He spoke softly, his voice threading through the silence like a fragile lullaby. Words tumbled out, half-formed confessions he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "You're safe now. I've got you. I don't know if you'll make it, but if you fight, I'll fight with you." His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he refused to sleep. He watched the fragile rise and fall of the dog's chest, terrified of what morning might bring. The hours dragged, but the dog endured. By dawn, a faint light broke across the room, brushing gold against the blanket where the animal lay. The man reached out again, offering water. This time the dog lifted his head weakly and drank. The sight was so small, so ordinary, yet it brought tears he hadn't expected. His throat tightened as he whispered, "Good boy, you're not giving up, are you?" Days passed in fragile repetition. Water, food, rest. The man cleaned the dog's wounds with gentle hands, wincing each time a pained whimper escaped. He found himself talking more than he ever had, as if the silence inside him had been waiting for someone, anyone, to listen. He told the dog about the long road trips he used to take, about the family he had grown distant from, about the loneliness that clung to him like dust. And though the dog could not answer, his eyes began to follow the man's movements, flickers of awareness returning like sparks in the dark. On the fourth day, the dog tried to stand. His legs trembled violently, collapsing beneath him almost immediately. But the man was there steadying him, murmuring encouragement. You'll get there, one step at a time." He guided him back onto the blanket, heart swelling with a strange, unfamiliar hope. Trust grew slowly, as fragile as the dog's recovering body. At first, he flinched when a hand came too close, memories of abandonment etched into his bones. But the man never forced him. He waited patient, until one evening the dog pressed his muzzle gently against his palm. The touch was light, fleeting, but it was enough. It was forgiveness. It was acceptance. Nights became easier. The man slept on the couch near the blanket, waking at every shift and sigh. The dog's breathing grew stronger, less ragged. His fur began to soften with careful cleaning, revealing patches of color beneath the dust. Each morning, the man found himself smiling at the smallest progress. A tail twitch, an attempt to sit upright. The way the dog's eyes lingered on him now with something almost like gratitude. But with progress came fear. One night, as the dog coughed violently, the man felt panic surge through him. He knelt, stroking trembling sides, whispering prayers into the dark. "Don't leave now. Please? You've come too far." His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, tears spilled unchecked. It wasn't just about saving a dog anymore. It was about saving himself, proving that love and hope were still possible even in a world that had taught him to expect loss. Morning came, and the dog endured. He always endured. The man found strength in that endurance, a quiet reminder that survival wasn't about perfection, but persistence. The bond between them thickened like roots beneath soil, invisible yet unbreakable. By the end of the second week, the dog stood without collapsing. His legs still wobbled, but determination burned in his eyes. The man laughed, a sound rusty from disuse, clapping his hands in joy. The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, and it felt like sunlight breaking through years of cloud. The house no longer felt empty. Silence was filled with the shuffle of paws, the soft rhythm of breathing, the sound of bowls clinking as water was poured and food prepared. For the first time in a long time, the man didn't dread coming home. He came back with anticipation, with purpose, knowing someone waited for him, someone who needed him. And though neither could speak it aloud, they both understood between death and dawn, a new life had been born. Not just for the dog, but for the man as well. The desert had taken so much from them both, but it had also given them each other. The day began with stillness, the kind of quiet morning where sunlight filters through thin curtains and lays itself across the floor in trembling golden stripes. The dog lay curled on the blanket, his breathing steady, his chest rising with the rhythm of something stronger than survival now, life itself returning, inch by inch. The man sipped his coffee at the kitchen counter, eyes lingering on him the way one might watch the fragile bloom of a flower, afraid even to blink lest the moment vanish. For weeks he had measured progress in teaspoons. A sip of water, a step without stumbling, a flicker of a tail. But now, there was something different in the dog's eyes, a brightness, a pull. As though the world outside the walls was calling, whispering promises of space and wind and freedom. The man felt it too, that urgency pressing against the walls of his chest. He set his mug down and crouched beside the dog, brushing a hand gently along his side. "Let's see what you can do out there, huh?" he murmured. The leash was unnecessary, yet he clipped it on anyway, more for his own reassurance than for control. The dog followed slowly, paws tapping against the floor, body still lean but stronger now, carrying itself with a quiet determination. When they stepped outside, the world opened like a secret revealed, the air fresh with morning, the desert stretching endlessly in soft shades of gold and pale blue. The dog froze at first, overwhelmed by the immensity of it all. The sense, the warmth of sunlight on his fur, the space after weeks of confinement. It was too much, too fast. He pressed close to the man's leg, seeking reassurance. The man rested a steadying hand on his back. "It's okay. The world's waiting for you." They walked slowly at first, the leash slack between them. The dog's steps were uneven, his legs remembering what strength felt like, trembling with the effort. Every few paces he faltered, but each time the man knelt beside him, patient, waiting until he found his balance again. Gradually, something shifted. The hesitation ebbed, replaced by cautious curiosity. His nose lifted to the wind, twitching at the flood of scents carried from miles away, sagebrush. Warm sand, the faint trace of distant animals. His ears perked, eyes sharpening with recognition of a world he had once known. Then came the moment. A rabbit darted across the horizon, its small body cutting through the sand like a streak of lightning. Instinct flared in the dog, his body tensed, muscles remembering what his spirit had never forgotten. He lunged forward, the leash pulling taut, his paws kicking up tiny sprays of dust. The man laughed, startled, then loosened his grip. "Go," he whispered, unclipping the leash with trembling fingers. "Go on." The dog hesitated only a heartbeat, then ran. It was clumsy at first, his legs awkward, strides uneven. But with every bound he grew steadier, faster, freer. The wind caught in his fur, tugging it back, filling his lungs with the clean burn of life. Dust rose in small clouds beneath him, trailing behind like smoke as though the desert itself was bearing witness to his resurrection. His ribs still showed, his body still thin, but in motion he was magnificent. Not broken, not abandoned, but alive. The man stood rooted to the earth, watching through eyes blurred with tears. His chest ached with something vast and unnameable. This was more than survival. This was defiance, a reclamation of everything the desert had tried to steal. He raised a hand to shield his eyes from the sun, but really it was to hide the trembling in his expression. His laughter broke again, raw and unrestrained, as he called out, "That's it! Run, boy!" "Run!" The dog circled wide, not far enough to vanish from sight, but far enough to taste freedom on his tongue. His ears streamed back, his tail lifted high. He no longer looked like the frail shadow found in the sand. He looked like what he was always meant to be. A creature of strength and speed, born to move, to chase, to live. When finally he slowed, panting heavily, he turned back toward the man. Their eyes met across the expanse of desert. And in that gaze there was something binding, something eternal. The man dropped to his knees as the dog bounded back, collapsing into his arms with unrestrained trust. They stayed like that, pressed together against the vast silence of the land, breathing in tandem. The desert, once cruel and merciless, had become a witness to rebirth. The same sun that had nearly killed him now burned warm on his back, a light of renewal instead of destruction. The same wind that had carried the scent of death now rushed cool against his fur, carrying freedom. For the man, it was more than a dog's recovery. It was proof that broken things could be remade, that emptiness could be filled, that hope was not a dream, but a living, breathing truth. He pressed his forehead gently to the dog's head, eyes closed. In that moment, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of gratitude, of love, of second chances neither of them had expected. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the man's leg, and the sound was like a heartbeat, steady and sure. For the first time in years, the man felt alive too. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. The house, once hollow and silent, was now alive with the quiet sounds of companionship, the soft pad of paws across the floor, the sigh of a body curling into rest, the occasional bark that startled the walls into remembering what joy sounded like. The man moved through his days with new steadiness. The weight of loneliness lifted in ways he hadn't thought possible. Each morning began with 2 lives instead of 1, a shared walk beneath a wide sky, the world unfolding not as emptiness but as possibility. The dog's strength returned slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon. His ribs still showed, but muscle formed where bone had once stood stark against skin. His coat thickened, revealing warm tones that shimmered beneath the sun, a blend of gold and dust. Like the desert itself had imprinted its resilience into him. His eyes, once dull and clouded, now held light, a flicker of mischief even, as if daring the man to keep up with him. Yet something lingered unresolved. The dog had no name. For weeks, he had been Buddy, or Boy, spoken with affection but without anchor. The man felt it each time he called, a hollow where something permanent should be. Names mattered. A name meant belonging. A name meant he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in molten shades of orange and crimson, the man sat on the back steps, the dog pressed against his side. The air was cooling, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and earth. He ran his hand absently over the dog's fur, thinking of the first time he had lifted him from the sand. A creature abandoned, nameless, left to die. And yet, here he was, whole again, resting with trust, so complete it broke the man's heart. "You need a name," he said softly, the words slipping into the quiet like a promise. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, eyes lifting toward him. The man searched for something that would fit, not just a word, but a story, a reminder of survival. His mind drifted back to the moment he had first heard the faint hum of the car engine echoing across the desert. The fragile thread that had tied them together. He thought of the wind carrying that sound, carrying him to the place where fate had waited. "Arlo," he whispered finally, testing the shape of it. The dog's head tilted, ears pricking as if he recognized himself in the sound. The man smiled, a rare and unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, Arlo. That's your name." The dog's tail thumped against the step, slow but steady, as if sealing the covenant. Arlo, no longer nameless, no longer forgotten. The desert's abandoned shadow had become a companion, a presence as steady as the horizon itself. From then on, every call carried meaning. "Come on, Arlo." "Good boy." Arlo. The name filled the air of the house, settled into its walls, turned solitude into belonging. It felt natural, inevitable, as though the dog had been waiting all along for someone to speak it into existence. Weeks passed into months. Arlo learned to chase again, to bound across the scrubland with energy that startled even himself. He barked at birds, dug at patches of earth, rolled in the grass with unabashed joy. The man laughed more often now, laughter that surprised him each time it left his throat. Neighbors noticed the change too. How his shoulders seemed lighter, how his steps carried new purpose. Some asked about the dog, and the man told the story in fragments: the desert, the rescue, the nights spent unsure if he would live. But he never quite captured the truth of it, how saving the dog had saved him too. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful day, they returned to the desert. The man wanted to see it again, the place where endings had turned into beginnings. The landscape looked the same, vast and endless, but it felt different now. The air seemed less cruel, the silence less empty. Arlo trotted ahead, nose to the wind, body strong and sure. The man watched him with a heart heavy in the best of ways. They stopped at the spot, or close enough, where Arlo had once lain waiting for death. The man crouched, resting his hand against the earth. The sand was cool now, the sun softening into twilight. He whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to fate, to chance, to the wind that had carried him here that day. Arlo bounded back to him, pressing his head into the man's chest with unrestrained affection. The man laughed, wrapping his arms around him, breathing in the warm, earthy scent of his coat. "You made it," he said quietly. Both did. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, the sky ignited with streaks of purple and rose. The desert, once a place of cruelty, now framed them in light so tender it felt like an apology. The wind stirred, brushing against them with a whisper that seemed to carry Arlo's name across the sands. The man rose, hand resting on his companion's back. Together, they walked into the fading light, their shadows stretching long and side by side. The desert did not erase the past, but it no longer defined it. What remained was this: two souls once lost, now found, bound together by survival and love. And as the last light bled into the horizon, the man thought of how close it had been, how easily the story could have ended differently. He pressed a hand to his companion's fur, whispering once more into the wind, not as prayer but as truth. "We're still here. Time has a way of softening memories, sanding down the sharp edges of pain until only outlines remain." Yet for the man, the desert never faded. It lingered behind his eyelids whenever he closed them, a silent reminder of how easily life can break, how fragile the thread that binds survival to surrender truly is. And yet, whenever he looked at Arlo, sprawled on the rug with his belly rising in steady, contented rhythm, he saw not the shadow of that moment but the miracle of its outcome. Months had folded into a year, and with them, the rhythms of companionship had deepened. Arlo was no longer the skeletal ghost found in the sand. He had grown into his body, muscles rippling beneath fur that gleamed in the sun. His bark carried strength now, not desperation. His eyes shone with trust, mischief, and the quiet knowing of a creature who had found where he belonged. The man's life had changed in subtler ways. The silence in his house was gone, replaced with motion and sound. The click of nails on hardwood, the soft whine of a dog asking to be let out, the creak of furniture as a heavy body curled close at night. Loneliness had retreated, not with fanfare, but in the steady way a tide recedes, leaving behind a shoreline full of possibility. One morning, as autumn crept across the desert, the man packed his truck with a cooler, a blanket, and a worn tennis ball. Arlo sat in the passenger seat, ears perked, tail sweeping the seat with anticipation. The road stretched before them, familiar now, no longer a scar, but a path leading them both to new places. They drove beyond the edges of town, past the old gas stations and shuttered diners, until the desert opened wide again. The man parked at the edge of a vast dry lakebed, the kind of place where sky and earth seemed to meet in seamless union. He opened the door and Arlo leapt down, paws kicking up dust as he bounded into the open. The wind rushed across the flat expanse, tugging at his fur, carrying his bark so far it seemed to echo against the horizon. The man stood watching, the tennis ball gripped loosely in his hand. When Arlo turned back, tongue lolling, eyes alight with joy, the man hurled it across the plain. Arlo chased with abandon, his body stretched long, every stride a declaration of life. He returned panting, dropped the ball at the man's feet, and barked again as if to say it again. They played until the sun climbed high, until the man's arm ached from throwing and Arlo's sides heaved with exhaustion. At last, they collapsed together on the blanket spread across the cracked earth. Arlo pressed his head against the man's chest, eyes closing, tail thumping lazily. The man stroked his fur, staring at the vastness around them, feeling something shift quietly inside. He realized, with a clarity that startled him, that the dog wasn't just his companion. Arlo had become a compass, pointing him toward a life he hadn't known he was missing. Caring for him had taught the man how to care for himself again, how to forgive his own failures, how to step into each day not as a burden, but as an invitation. As the afternoon waned, a storm began to build on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in, bruising the sky, and a wind picked up, sharp with the scent of rain. The man gathered the blanket, called Arlo close, and together they stood at the edge of the lakebed, watching lightning stitch across the distance. The first drops fell, cool, cleansing rare in the desert. Arlo tilted his head back, mouth open, catching the water on his tongue. The man laughed, the sound blending with the thunder, raw and unrestrained. The rain grew heavier, soaking them both until their clothes and fur clung tight. They didn't run for shelter. They stood there side by side as the storm washed over them, and in that moment, the desert was no longer a place of endings but of renewal. The earth drank deeply. The air filled with the sweet scent of wet soil, and the man felt a truth settle into his bones. They had not only survived the desert, they had remade it into a place of belonging. When they finally returned home dripping and muddy, Arlo shook himself violently, spraying water across the small kitchen. The man laughed again, too tired to scold, and collapsed into the armchair. Arlo jumped onto his lap, despite his size curling into a damp, warm weight that felt like the very definition of home. The man rested his head back, eyes closing, his hand absently stroking the dog's back. Life, he realized, wasn't about outrunning the desert or forgetting its cruelty. It was about carrying its lessons. That even in the most desolate places, even in the silence of abandonment, something can bloom. A bond, a second chance, a life worth living. Arlo shifted in his lap, sighed deeply, and the sound was like the settling of roots, steady and permanent. The man whispered into the quiet, words carried only for the two of them. We belong, both of us. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the air cool and clean. The desert, washed and renewed, stood silent under the starlight. But inside, two lives rested together, bound not by chance anymore, but by choice. And in that choice lay a future neither of them could have imagined. A life built not on what was lost, but on what had been found.